So hopefully a lot of you have already kind of registered and or at least started some of the early questions on the homework, get those out of the way. Like I said, a lot of those are just so you're getting more familiar with the platform. But now we're after today, and especially after Friday, you should be able to work on a pretty big bulk of the questions that are on that homework. We use the iClicker today. I think I've got everything working. So we're my last section. I think I've got everything sort of set up so that we should be good to go. Other than that, are there any questions for me before we kind of jump into things?
I don't have my iClicker yet. I did get an email just like an hour ago that my president told me to get a packet.
Okay, so if you have ordered one and are waiting on one, send me some type of email or show me that. And when I upload these, I'll kind of upload it as excused for right now. More so just making sure we kind of have everything linked up. So yeah, if you have ours, I had some last session too. If you're waiting on one or it's been ordered as a back order, just send me an email or some evidence of that, and we'll kind of we have 20, I'll grade you or side 19, so it doesn't help you, doesn't hurt you. Okay. Hopefully after this week you won't have to deal with that. Okay. Any other questions? We'll get going here. All right. So last class we left off talking about things that would shift that demand curve, right? So we had talked about all this demand curve really reflects is the relationship between the price and the quantity demanded of the good, right? So we have this downward sloping line, we call this our demand curve. We're going to keep it linear, and this just reflected that as price goes down, people are willing to buy more and more of a good, right? We also said we can think about this as the demand curve really reflects the marginal benefit of every single unit, right? So let's maybe think about that. So let's say I had a price set at $10. This person looking at that price is essentially their marginal cost, right? That's how much it's going to cost them to consume one additional unit. Like whatever the price is, $10 here. So for that very first unit, that very first quantity, you can think of as though, well, they would have been willing to pay up to this amount. So you will always purchase something, you always decide to do something. It's always optimal to do something as long as the marginal benefit is greater than or equal to the marginal cost. We kind of talked about that, I think, last Friday. So the idea here is that this person, that first unit, the marginal cost of $10 is well below how much they benefit from that, right? Or their marginal benefit, because we know their marginal benefit is exactly whatever it is on this line, because every single price here, they'd be willing to pay until you get to a price that's above that point. Now, the price they were willing to pay up to their marginal benefit, right? Up to that point where they're equal. Okay? So we know that this line on demand curve represents the highest price someone would be willing to pay for that first unit. The highest price someone would be willing to pay for that second unit. And any prices above those will now marginal cost, the price here to the consumer, would be above marginal benefit, and they would no longer decide to purchase it. So this line reflects the point at which kind of that marginal benefit would be exactly equal to that marginal cost, or exactly equal to the price. So this idea in mind, we're going to have demand curve reflects the marginal benefit of each unit consumed. Let's see if I can get this red marker. Grab the markers and all those things. So like that. Another way we said we can think about demand shifts is if I see an increase in demand, that means that at every single price, someone is willing to buy more of the good. That's an increase in overall demand. So at any price, someone would have to be willing to buy more of the good. At this price, someone is going to be willing to buy more of the good. At this price, someone is willing to buy more of the good. And that's why we kind of think about what an increase in demand looked like. We said it was this outward, or this rightward shift. A decrease in demand was the exact opposite. We saw this kind of decrease, or this leftward shift towards that point of 0, 0. Another way of thinking about an increase in demand is if we think about the demand curve reflecting marginal benefit, an increase in demand would mean that at any given quantity, it now has a higher value or a higher marginal benefit. So if the demand curve reflects marginal benefit, then when we see an increase in the demand curve, at every quantity, we're seeing an increase in the marginal benefit. In every quantity, we're seeing an increase in the marginal benefit, right? And that's just another way of thinking about what this increase in demand curve is. I have two ways. Same price, people are willing to buy more, or you can think about at the same quantity, people are willing to pay more for that same quantity. That's kind of a little review. We kind of left off there. Any questions on that? We're going to jump into a couple more things that we'll talk about that shift that demand curve. So I think we talked about last class, we left off with like fads or tastes and preferences. We also talked through normal and inferior goods. We're also going to think about how the price of other goods could influence the demand curve for something. So substitute goods are going to be goods that are used in place of each other, right? So maybe think of this as, I don't know, automobiles and public transportation, right? Or you could even break this down. It could be different brands, right? We're talking about perfectly competitive markets. We said they have to have the exact same product, right? Well, if there's ever any difference in product, you could almost think about, the demand for Chevy versus the demand for Ford, or the demand for Pepsi versus Coke, or whatever you want to competing brands that have a different product, right? But there would be substitutes, right? One of those, I either purchase a can of Pepsi or a can of Coca-Cola, right? I would get one or the other. So there's substitute goods. So what's going to happen is for substitute goods, if the price of that substitute good goes up, it's going to increase the demand of the good that we're concerned with. So we'll call these X and Y to begin. I just kind of keep it general. So think about, we have the good that we're concerned with. So I'm going to call this the quantity of our X good. Now here we've got kind of the price of this X good. We've got the demand curve, the original demand curve, right? And now we see the price of a substitute good goes up, right? So think about this as the demand for maybe Pepsi, right? If you wanted to, if it makes it easier for you as we're writing this out, instead of X, you can just replace X with Pepsi, right? And then you think about the price of Coca-Cola goes up, right? Or this Y good, the price goes up. And I'll get out of your way here in a second. So if we see an increase in the price of that Y good, if the price of Coke gets higher, what do you think happens to the demand for Pepsi? Yeah, it goes up, right? You got those two in front of you. When one becomes more expensive, I'm more likely to substitute away from that good. I'm more likely to purchase the one that is now relatively cheap. So if the price of that Y good goes up, the demand for X, right, is also going to go up, right? Or we see this kind of, I was kind of use a little apostrophe there to kind of note, okay, that's our new demand curve after this change happened. So what's going to happen if the price of that substitute goes down? So that good or that Y good now becomes relatively, I do the same thing, hold on. Goes down. The price of the Y good is now lower, or the price of Coca-Cola is now lower. What's going to happen to the demand curve for Pepsi? Yeah, well, it's now relatively more expensive, right? Because this other thing I can substitute away from Pepsi to get is now cheaper. So we're going to have more people less likely to buy Pepsi, call this D2, right? I'm going to see this kind of decrease in my demand curve. Questions on that? I'll move out of the way for you guys. I feel bad. I don't know how to use the middle part of the board without blocking off at least one side. So, questions on that? I think that's fairly intuitive. So we've got these are examples: laptops and desktop computers, pens and pencils, Pepsi and Coke. Right? It's a little bit easier to think about if you put some names to these, but we can write it out generally with X and Y, and whatever two substitute goods we're looking at, those same principles would apply. Let's kind of conclude this too. Here's a show if you're taking notes. So the next thing we're going to talk about is not substitute goods, but complementary goods. So these ones are, I think the age-old example is like peanut butter and jelly, because like you don't use, you want to have both of them on a sandwich, but then you get people who are all upset with, I don't like, I have peanut butter and banana sandwich, or they try to come up with some, thing that goes against it. I think the best way to think about complementary goods, to me, this is the best example that exists, is any product that needs batteries and batteries, right? I can't use, I can't use my little clicker thing unless I also have batteries. So if the price of batteries is $200, what do you think happens to my demand for this clicker? It's going way down, right? Because in order to use it, I have to also buy the batteries. Right? So anytime we have complementary goods, we can think about a change in the complementary goods price is going to change the demand for the other goods. So is everybody okay if I erase this? This is our substitute goods. Let's think about what happens for two general goods. And I actually think I'll write out not X and Y here, but give you an actual example. So let's think about, I said batteries. Actually, I was faced with this under last fall because I shouldn't say I hit a deer, the deer hit me. But I had to get a new car, right? So instead of this good X, let's think about, we'll call this ECON, and the price of. So I looked into getting a car that was electric, right? Or at the very least hybrid. The problem is, from everything I've read, you got to replace the batteries every few years, and the batteries are still like really expensive, a couple grand. So you think about how is the demand for electric cars going to shift up or down depending on the price of those ion kind of batteries or whatever the batteries are that the electric cars require. Well, if the price of those batteries that the electric car needs goes up, it's kind of like I said with my clicker. What do you think is going to happen to demand for electric cars? The batteries become really, really expensive. Demand for electric cars is probably going to go down, right? Decrease. So, or think about it at any given price level, people are now willing to buy fewer and fewer electric cars, or the market as a whole, there are fewer people willing to buy electric cars, and we kind of see this have decreased, right, in the demand for those cars. So, decrease in the demand for e-cars. What if instead those batteries become relatively cheap? If I was out looking for a hybrid car, and I looked up in the research or whatever, showed me that, well, they last for 20 years and the batteries are now only like $50. What do you think is going to happen? Am I going to be more or less likely to buy an electric car? Way more likely, right? So if we see a decrease in the price of these batteries, and I'll get out of you guys' way in a second, we're going to see an increase in those demand for e-cars. Or at any given price, I'm now willing to buy, or the economy as a whole is more willing to buy a higher number of e-cars. We'll call this if I were you, by the way, I try to do it with my markers. It might be helpful to like have different colored pens this class. I always buy the G2 pens. I got a red, blue, and a black one. That'll sometimes kind of help. I try to like use this notation with 1 and 2, but any questions on that? I think I've got everything up here. You can think about the price of gasoline in cars, but I don't think that one's really a great one. I mean, we do see the demand for like SUVs and trucks does fluctuate a little bit with the price of gasoline. But I mean, the price of gasoline changes so much and the life of a car is so long. It's not that strong. When you think about something that has like a battery that is a couple $1,000s, that you really start to see as those become cheaper, you see these huge increases in demand for electric cars. Yeah, I think that's all I'll say there. Any questions or anything here? Shouldn't be too bad. I think this one is kind of intuitive. Yeah.
What car do you drive?
What car do I drive?
Just curious.
So I actually drive a. Don't hate me too much if like I love the environment too, and they have fixed them. I got all my recalls done, but I have an old 2015 Volkswagen Passat, but it's diesel. So it gets like I drove to my brother lived in Oklahoma for a while. You got me off on a rant. You guys, don't ask me too many questions like this. It will waste too much class time. But I drove to Oklahoma, like all interstate driving. I think I got like 54 miles to the gallon. So I could, electric, diesel, both get pretty good gas mileage. So, all right. Anyways, no one cares about that. So another shifter that we're going to talk about today are price expectations. Okay. So we've got what's going to happen to the price in the future is going to impact current demand. Okay? So let's think about not just price expectations, we can also do income expectations. So everybody got all this? What is it? So let's say that I currently, I don't know, maybe I'm currently poor. How did I set this up? Yeah, higher expected income is the first thing. So let's say I'm relatively poor. I am in college. All right. So think about quantity, I'll call this now, present, right? Got current kind of demand. Right? What happens if we expect our income to go, we'll call this future income. We expect future income to be higher. Okay? What might happen to our consumption of certain goods now? And so we got people going a different way. So let's stop and think about this. What do a lot of people do if they know that they're going through college, if they know when they get done, that they're going to have a job that's paying them, I don't know, $60,000, $70,000 a year? What might be some things they do today? So yeah, but I'll come back to that. I want to hit this thing first. So what do not all of you, but a lot of college students have that then becomes a problem down the road? Loans, yeah, right? So when you take out a loan, what are you really doing? What you're saying is if I expect to have more income in the future, I can take out loans now to consume more, right? Because I think I'm going to make more money down the road to pay those off. So that's kind of the idea we have here with expected income. If I expect to have more income in the future, I might do some things like take out loans to purchase more of those goods now, right? Only if we're thinking about that as kind of our conventional normal goods, right? Goods that we would like to have if we have more money. So if we expect to have higher income in the future, that's actually going to increase current demand, right? So demand now would go up. And then the exact opposite would happen, right? If we had a decrease in future income, we would kind of decrease our demand now for normal goods. So this is what it would look like for a normal good. What if, we could call it the same. This is going to be the relationship for normal goods. What if we had inferior goods? Higher expected future income should do what to the current demand for inferior goods? Yeah, if I think that I'm going to be making $100,000 next year, I might be willing to splurge a little bit and not buy as much ramen now, right? So for inferior goods, if I have higher expected income, we actually see the current demand for those goods decrease, right? So it's really the same relationship as we had for income and demand for normal inferior goods. It's just now it's based off of expected income. But it works the same way. If I have more income, that increases the demand for normal goods. If I expect more income in the future, that also would increase the current demand for normal And then the exact opposite for inferior goods. So nothing really a whole lot new there. What about price expectations? So now let's think about not expected income, but expected prices of that good. Okay? So not current prices, but expected prices in the future. So I've got a demand curve. Everyone got this? So we've got current demand. And we're thinking about what do we expect that the price of this good, so we'll call this P subscript E, expected prices. If that expected price in the future is higher, we expect the price of this good to go up tomorrow, what might we do today? Be more likely to buy it today. I had a guy this summer who was, I don't know why he decided not to smoke, but he like, I have an addiction to like, caffeine, so I always go to this gas station and either get like a fountain drink or a coffee. He just started giving them to me for free because I would usually get gas there as well. But I remember one time he goes, look, I'm not supposed to tell anyone this, but I know that we're increasing prices in the morning by 30 cents a gallon. So if you want to get gas, I would suggest you get it now. So what do you think happened to my demand currently for gasoline when he told me that? Well, I expected high price in the future. You know, I'm going to need gas at some point, and so my demand currently increased, right? If I think prices are going to be higher tomorrow, I'm going to be way more likely to consume more today, right? Or at any given price today, I'm willing to consume more. So I think that price is going to be higher in the future, right? And then so we can think about, we see an increase in current demand, or I'm using this word now because it's easier to write. Right, so current demand will go up if I expect prices to be higher in the future. And it's the exact opposite, right? If we expected prices to be lower tomorrow, what might I do today? Try to hold off another 24 hours, right? If I know I can get it tomorrow for a cheaper price, as long as I don't need it right this second, we're likely going to see current demand actually decreases. Any questions on that? I think it's too tough of an idea. And we could get a little bit more into the weeds here. I usually don't ask questions about this, but I will kind of talk about it. But I'm going to ask like a homework or exam question. But you can work with other expectations as well. You could think about, we can make this real complicated. If I expect complementary good prices to change in the future, that could inadvertently also change current demand, right? If I want to get an electric car, but I know that there's some new regulation coming in that's going to increase the price of their batteries, right? A complementary good, well, that could also cause current. So we could actually do a lot of combinations of, expected prices with complementary goods or substitute goods. I won't do that, but those expectations could also play a role in current demand as well. So it could become even more complicated than what I've kind of set it out to be. Any questions over? Yeah.
Am I not understanding what you said about price expectations, or is that?
No, I have this written wrong. Go on. Lower expected.
Yeah, right. Oops. Thank you for catching that. We could flip either one of these, but right, it should be that higher expected prices would lead to higher current demand. Nope, you're right. Thank you for saying something.
I'll copy paste and just make sure the other one's down. Higher expected income results. Okay. Yeah. So the other ones are really quick. Correct. Any other questions on that? Because we did taste and preferences last class. That's just kind of our catch-all category. To be completely honest, it's things that we can't explain, right? Well, for whatever reason, demanded, people wanting this product for social reasons or whatever, it's hard for us to figure out sometimes. So I have a little bit of a summary slide here that kind of reminds you of what demand increases and decreases look like. Gives you some examples of each one of those different types of categories. We kind of went over them
pretty good now, I think, so. Where are we at in time? Oh, we're good. So what if, I ask you a question, all right? So hopefully we're following along a little bit. Gonna try to use these to see kind of where we're at in our understanding. So let's say I asked you what happens to the demand curve for music downloads. And this is like an old example because no one uses it anymore. But if people still were using iPods or whatever device you're using to listen to music on, falls, right? So kind of think about here, right? Back in the day, the only value of an iPod, right, was the fact that you could play music on it. So if I'm downloading music, a complementary good would be this iPod, right? So what happens to the demand curve for music downloads if a complementary goods price goes down? Right? Should be AA. So I think I have them all set to AA. Yeah. What's last class? Is anyone else using the app? It's not showing up. Okay, let me. I might have to ask you guys to answer this again. And let's make sure I didn't mess with the course settings. So should be showing up as Econ 201 Fall 2020 Section 3. So let's try this one more time. Had this working in my other section. What else would it? Is it not still not showing up? Let's try reopening the iClicker since maybe when I switched over. See it now? Okay, don't worry about that. I'll get rid of that. But let's see if I start it now, if you guys can see it. I know they switched it from like Reef to iClicker Mobile, but I don't think I should have to update anything. You guys see it now or no? No, for the app, are you guys seeing it pop up? Why the hell is it showing that? Let's go with. It's linked up to the right course. I think this is the only thing that shouldn't have to be turned on. Because last class, someone asked me, you guys were seeing like 2 or 3 of them. Yeah. You're not seeing any of them on the mobile app? No. All right. What else would this possibly be? Let me think. So I'm using this one. Last class, because I know it worked for my last section because I had people answer on it. Oh, yeah. Let me look and see what theirs was like. Oh, let me see. The date set wrong. 23rd to the 30th. That app no. Was different, right? Let's double check. I think that might be. Oh no, it was selected on both of them. Well, can't catch a break with these things. I don't know why it's working. It's the same thing. Even shows it's enabled. So let's try one more time. If it doesn't work this time, we'll just give up on it. Still not showing up on the mobile app. Okay. Well, I might ask one of you for some help then.
It was working when you started it.
And then it stopped? So like when I first pulled it up,
Yeah.
it showed up. I'll go on iClicker Clouders and try to figure this out later today. Okay, so I guess we're not using these. Jesus Christ. So I will hopefully have those working, figured out why now Reef isn't working on Friday. It worked from our other section, that's why I'm kind of confused. I wonder if it has something to do with it. I closed it. So we'll try again, I guess, on Friday with these. But we'll kind of work through these questions. I'll kind of show you some more. We'll probably see something like this on Friday, but for the supply curve. So if I have the price of a complementary good going down, what's going to happen to the demand for the good that I'm concerned with? Yeah, right. So if it's now cheaper to buy some of these devices that play music, I'm more likely to download music, right? So we kind of get this increase in demand, right? At every given price, we would see a higher quantity demand. What if we had music downloads for the price of CDs? So that, once again, a little bit of an aged example, no one's really buying it anymore. But what would happen to the demand for music downloads if the price of a substitute good went down? So I could substitute away from downloading music and paying for it to purchasing a CD. So if CDs become like a dime and I can get every single song on the CD, or I can pay a bunch of money to do the music downloads, what am I more likely to do the music downloads when the price of CDs goes way down? I'm more or less likely to. Yeah, right. I'd be less likely to pay for music downloads if I could go out and get a CD for 10 cents, right? So we're going to see this decrease in demand for music downloads when the price of a substitute good goes down. What happens to the demand curve for music downloads if the price of music downloads falls? It's a little bit tricky.
It goes up.
So we're actually not going to see a shift in demand at all. Remember, the demand curve reflects the relationship between the price and the quantity of that good, holding everything else constant. When these other things we held constant start changing, that's when we see the shifts in demand. But if the price of the good we're looking at changes, then we're going to see no change in the demand curve. We're just going to move to a different point on the demand curve, right? So this is a key distinction. When you're thinking about a change in the price of the good you're looking at, you don't see a shift in the demand curve. The demand curve is telling you what the new quantity demanded will be at that new price, right? When these other things outside of the price of the good change, that's when we see the shifts in demand, right? So when you see a change in the price of the good the market you're looking at, that's just going to change where you're at on the demand curve or the quantity demand. There's a difference between quantity demanded and the entire demand, right? Or entire demand curve. Any questions on that? Because that's a little bit tricky. It's a hard concept for a lot of people to grasp. A change in the price of the good just moves you along the curve. It's other things changing other than the price of that good that are going to shift it. Okay? All right, so we'll do a little bit on the supply curve. We won't do shifts today, but I will kind of set us up so we can start to think about supply curve. It's really similar to demand, just like everything's flipped on its head. So if we think about quantity supplied, that's just going to be, now we're not thinking about consumers and people buying things. We're thinking about the producers, the sellers, the people trying to sell you products, right? So what the law of supply says is that as the price of a good goes up, sellers are more willing or are willing to supply more of a good, right? if I'm selling something and I can only get $5 for it, maybe I don't sell as much as if I can get $100 for it, right? And so this relationship between price and quantity supplied, we're going to have a lot more people willing to supply things to the market when the price of that good gets really, really high. You think of this as there weren't a lot, and this is a little bit getting into equilibrium, but I think this idea will hold. So there weren't a lot of people producing and supplying masks 2.5 years ago, right? There wasn't, right? Because the price that they could have got, there wasn't a lot of people willing to pay a lot for them. So the price that they could sell them for was relatively low. And so there's a pretty low supply, right? Low quantity supply. All of a sudden, they became this thing that people would be willing to pay, they needed, so they'd be willing to pay quite a bit more money for than they were before, right? So what happens when the price that they can sell this good for went up? Well, we saw a lot more producers, a lot more sellers of masks, right? So this is the idea that as the price goes up, there's going to be more people willing to supply that good. And even if we look at an individual, like one single company or producer's supply curve, if the price of a good goes up, I'm willing to try to produce more and more of it, right? Right, we can think about, just like with our demand curve, we're going to have a supply schedule. So we have a demand schedule, we have a supply schedule. If we then take that supply schedule, which is just showing us at every given price, or here a small set of prices, but you could break this down if you really wanted to, every single penny, right? You could look at different prices and the quantity supplied at those prices. We can then take those X and Y values and plot out our supply curve, just like we did for demand. So I'm using these orange mocha frappuccinos because we'll eventually get to figure out what the equilibrium prices, these things. But for now, right, we're just thinking about supply. So I take these values, I've got my quantity supplied that's going to be on my x-axis, right? Just like quantity demanded was on my x-axis. I'm going to keep price on my y-axis and just plot these points, right? So I'm going to take 0 and 0, plot that point. And then I'm going to plot 3 as my x value, $1 is my y value. Keep going through this, 6 and 2, 9 and 3, so blah, blah, blah. Plot every single one of these points from my supply schedule, draw a line through them. That's going to give me my supply curve. Same process we use for demand. It's just now, instead of a downward sloping line, we end up with this upward sloping line, right? Which reflects that as the price goes up, individuals are willing to produce and sell more and more of the good, right? So there's a kind of direct positive relationship between those two things. Any questions on this? I usually go a little quicker through this than with demand because it's really similar, right? It's the same kind of procedure. So we have a supply curve as well, just like we had a demand curve equation, we got a supply curve equation. So price is equal to A plus B times quantity, right? So it's going to look exactly the same as our demand equation, right? Until we start to think about the values of A and B, right? Here, A still represents my intercept value, right? So if I go back, right, I have a y-axis intercept value. And I'm going to get that by plugging in the quantity of 0, right? So if I plug in the quantity of 0 there, B times 0 is 0. And the price that I would, kind of start out at is whatever that intercept value A is, right? So it's just like the demand, A is our intercept. The slope, right? We're going to find that the same way we did before. It's going to be how much how much the price would increase if the quantity supplied went up by 1, right? So if the quantity supplied goes up by 1, this slope, this B value tells us how much the price would need to go up for us to sell one more unit. Okay? Unlike demand, we no longer have a negative value for B because our slope is now positive. So now our slope B for our supply curve will always be a positive value, right? Reflecting that this upward kind of sloping line. Okay? Well, other than that, it's the same kind of idea. We can find the slope by doing rise over run. We'll talk a little bit more about as we look through some examples. But here, what I want to kind of focus on is that value of B, that slope for the supply curve, is going to be positive.
Okay, so just like the demand curve reflected marginal benefits, we're going to have the supply curve is actually reflecting marginal costs. So I think I can get at this idea a little bit better if I'm drawing something here. So let's say got quantity, got price, and I've got some upward sloping supply. Okay. So before I said we can think of demand as marginal benefit of a consumer, we can think about supply as the marginal cost of a producer or a seller. Right? And why can we think of it that way? Well, let's say that I had this price of $10. Right? The only way someone is going to be willing to supply that to the market is if I can would be if the marginal benefit of supplying that good to the market is greater than or equal to its marginal cost. Okay. So for a seller, what's the marginal benefit? That's actually the price, right? It costs the producer something to make the good, and then the benefit is whatever they can sell the good for, whatever the price is, right? So if the price was $10, you see here, well, for that first unit supplied, the marginal cost was way low. And then for the second unit, the marginal cost is still well below the marginal benefit or the price the seller gets to receive. All the way up to this point, and this is the quantity at which, whatever quantity this is, call this a Q star for right now, it must be that the marginal cost was exactly equal to $10, because any quantity past that, I'm no longer willing to supply it to the market at a price of 10 because it's cost me more than $10 to produce it. So if it's going to cost me $12 to produce something and I can only sell it for 10, I'm not going to produce that good, right? But the reason why there is going to be some quantity at which we stop at is because we don't have the same marginal cost to producing every single unit. So the very first unit that we supply to the market is going to be the one that we can make the cheapest, right? And you may think of this as well, if I'm making desks, right? Every desk has the same exact marginal cost. Well, not really, because even if all the explicit like material costs are the exact same, you're still going to have increasing marginal costs, because if I'm taking my time to do something, let's say it's a small scale thing, and I'm producing, I don't know, homemade jewelry or something, right? And that's my business, okay? Well, the first bracelet or whatever I produce, I'm going to use my most useless hour, an hour in which I had no other options. I wasn't going to do anything else. The opportunity cost of taking that time to make that bracelet was relatively low. So even if material costs are the same across the goods, as I use more and more hours to produce more and more of these bracelets, I start having to choose hours of my day where the opportunity cost is now that I'm giving up things that I might really want to do, right? Giving up an experience that I value a lot because I have to work 12 hours on these bracelets, right? So initially, though, the first hour or two, I'm giving up my least costly hours, my least valuable hours, right? So even if the material costs are the same, right, we're always going to have increasing marginal costs because of this idea of I'm going to use my least costly hours first, and then I eventually, right, have to use my more and more costly. So if I want to keep on producing more, I'm going to have to use my hours that I value higher and higher, and that's why we have this increasing marginal cost curve, right? I think a lot of times it's a little confusing because we think about, well, why would the cost of the materials go up as I produce more? That's not necessarily the case. It's that I'm having to take my labor hours, and as I use more and more labor hours, they become more and more costly, right? And that's why I see this increasing marginal cost. I guess if you could just produce things with like 0 labor hours, maybe we could get a weird scenario where we have like a supply curve that's flat, but there's not really any relevant applicable examples of that. Any questions on any of this? So we could do things like find the marginal cost of different quantities, right? Once I have my supply curve, I believe we go back, right? If we want to go up, we want to find kind of the rise over the run here, you can choose any 2 points. Right? So I might choose probably these two because the 0, 0 points kind of easy. I could choose this one, but here I can see the numbers a little bit easier. So I'm going from this point to this point. How much does the rise over run? So what's the difference in my y coordinates? I'm going from 0 to 2. Right? So I'm going from 0 to 2, so 2 minus 0. Then I'm going from 0 to 6, so over 6 minus 0. 2 over 6 is 1/3. That's how we had this, what was that? 1/3 slope, right? So if I have my supply equation, I'm telling you supply really just reflects marginal costs. So to find the marginal cost of the first unit, I would just plug in the quantity of 1. 1 times 1/3 plus 0. The marginal cost of providing that first unit was 1/3. I wanted the marginal cost of what are the other ones? The 9th unit. If I plug in the 9th unit here, the quantity of 9, 9 times 1/3 is 3 plus 0. And that's how I got my marginal cost for that 9th unit was $3. Right? So the only way I'll supply 9 units to the market is if I can get at least a price of $3. Any other questions on kind of anything there? Okay, so a lot of this is really similar to what we're doing with demand, just kind of the exact opposite. Like before, the consumer, the price is a bad thing, right? The price is a cost. But for the seller, the price being higher is a good thing because that's the money they're receiving. Right? So everything's just kind of flipped on its axis. We can do the same thing that we did with demand as well. I'm not going to waste a lot of time on this because it's the same principle. I don't think it's that much different. We could look at every given price, maybe that there's different amounts of this drink that these different companies are willing to supply, right? So if I have multiple producers or multiple sellers to get market supply, just like with demand, I'll just go through and at every price, add up how much each individual would be willing to supply the market, right? So Starbucks and Jitterbug at $3 would make 9 and 6 of these drinks. Market supply would be 15 of those drinks at that price. Right? Same idea as what we're doing with demand. Got our market supply curve. I think we'll end here. So before we go, we've got a couple things to say. So we'll leave off. We've got our market supply. We're just adding up individual supply curves, just like we did with the demand curve. So now that we have market supply, we can start to think about things that might shift the supply curve. Right? So I go over one of them. I taped it yesterday. I thought we might get a little bit further today. So I have like I think it's 3.5, 4-minute video I'll put up on YouTube at 2 o'clock today that I expect you to kind of watch before Friday. Hopefully I'll have some accurate questions that will work and we can use. They'll be asking about the things talked about in that video. It's really going to be the first look and a little bit of a discussion of shifts in the supply curve. So expect that you'll have watched that by the time we start class on Friday, and we'll hopefully be using the iClickers to ask you a couple questions about that. Okay. All right. We'll see you guys on Friday.